Welcome to DEIJ Hot Takes. My name is Daryl Sinclair, and this is the podcast where we discover the bold and transformative ideas shaping diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice work today. In this episode, we are joined by Yasmin Aslam-Hashmi, the ECIS Middle Leader Certificate Course Facilitator and teacher at the Intercommunity School of Zurich. Yasmin, thank you so much for making the time to join us today. Please, if you could share with us the DEIJ hot take that guides your work.
Firstly, thank you for having me. And my hot take is we must consider the inherent value of every contributor by being nuanced and truthful in the representation of our community.
Okay, that's an interesting hot take. Now, how we perceive the value of contributors is a strongly contested point, and actually the basis for a lot of to and fro in the teaching world. So could you take us through what categorizes, the value of a contributor, why this is a hot take, and how do you make this a reality in the work that you do?
Absolutely. I think too often the public image or mission of an organization is shaped by the select few, the leadership, communications teams, or the dominant voices, while the diverse experiences or identities and contributions of others are sidelined or oversimplified. But what if we reimagined that narrative? What if we really understood the we that reflected everyone? And so just thinking about that, I think about, valuing every contributor. And so DEIJ isn't just about who is included, but how they are seen, people are seen, how people are heard, how people are represented. And, I reflect back to a student that I teach and, we just started the new school year and, it was a lot of anxiety about this one student and I didn't know who this person was, never taught them before. And I started getting anxiety because there was all these emails being sent. And I was just like, okay, what's the deal? Come on, it can't be that bad. So this child walks in and I was like, you know what? I'm going to take a different take on this. I'm just going to get to know them and see where that goes. And so I forgot about the emails and I sat down and just, I was with them. I was present. And, I said his name properly with proper pronunciation. I have a South Asian background. So, I speak many languages. So, saying, Asian names, particularly South Asian names, I can say them quite authentically, right? And so I said his name and he looked up at me and he just kind of paused. And I was like, oh no, maybe I did something wrong, and then what happened was that he was just so engaged. And then at the end of the lesson, he comes up to me and he's like, Miss Hashmi, you said my name properly, like exactly how my family says it. I'm like, yeah, I think I did. Is that okay? And he's like, yeah, but you can call me what everyone else calls me. And I'm like, okay, are you okay with that? He's like, absolutely. And then he didn't give me his back. And culturally from, certain parts of the world, you don't give your back to your teachers because it's seen as a sign of disrespect. So he's like, thank you for today. And he walked backwards towards the door and then turned around and walked out. And I'm like, is that the same child that I got all these emails about? And that's the thing. It's that dominant voice. Are we truly seeing individuals for who they are? And so when I think about this student, I think about, telling a more truthful story, which means being comfortable in a way with a contradiction of the narrative that's being said. And I think when you work with inclusion, you need to challenge that contradiction in order to bring change, and you need to create that sense of discomfort in order for people to see another perspective. It's not just the one perspective that we're seeing. And I think that is the essence of it, is that, when we are valuing every contributor within a community, then as I had mentioned before, DEIJ isn't about who is just being included. I think about Shelley Moore, and she often talks about inclusion of neurodivergent individuals. The inclusion is not just bringing people all in one classroom. It's really seeing who the individual is within the classroom and not just bringing everybody in and that's inclusive. But it is, how is each individual being seen? How are they being heard? How are they being represented? Everybody contributes to the life of an organization, from the students to the staff, from support workers to senior leaders, and it's their stories. And so whose stories are being told? Whose are being left out? Whose stories are being honored? Whose stories are not being honored? And that requires a certain level of wisdom where you step back and you have to have a metacognitive look at what is going on in your organization.
Mm. And when you're doing this work, you've given a beautiful example of where you've made this valuing of different people's, different students in this case's perspective, their lived experience, and you've been able to reflect that with the student and have a wonderful transformative impact on them. So looking at it from the side of the teachers, recognizing that different teachers will be at different points in the journey that you're very far along with. Different teachers will have different cultural backgrounds and different cultural expertise. So as you're working within your school, leading on some of these concepts, how do you engage or support the individuals and teachers who might be new to these ideas of cultural competence or inclusion work? And thus they might view it in ways which they feel are progressive. They say, oh, I treat all my students the same, no matter what, they have a culture of not showing their back. But in my opinion, I think students should go this way and I treat all students this way. That's my form of equity. How do you support them in recognizing where their approaches might need a shift or a change to support an inclusive community where everyone is genuinely being valued as a contributor?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's important to meet, and I don't want to oversimplify this. I think it's important to meet people where they are at. And quite often when you do DEIJ work, because you go through this journey, when you go through this journey, you feel that, why isn't everybody understanding or seeing the things that I'm seeing? It's so obvious. And it can be very frustrating, but it's a journey. And that's just it. If we look at our understanding of inclusion, and I've said this on many platforms, when I think of inclusion, I think of change. If we look at inclusion 10 years ago, our understanding was so different. If we look 20 years ago, it was so different. 100 years ago, it was so different. And so I think that in order to really create inclusive spaces, we have to be inclusive with the perspectives of what inclusion is in everybody's journey, because everyone's journey is going to be different. And when I work with individuals and I have these conversations, I always arrive and I'm present where the individual is, and I engage in conversation and I ask a lot of questions with curiosity, because I'm a former international school student. I'm well traveled. I speak a lot of languages. I've engaged with a lot of cultures, but not everyone's like that. And so from my side as a facilitator, I have to remind myself, I'm very different. I come from a different background. My perspective is going to be different. And so is the other person on the other side. And I need to honor that person where they are. And so engaging in conversation and asking questions, I think that is the first step, really, to initiating inclusion work, is figuring out where are people at and then figuring out a roadmap.
Well, I have to ask this question. I'm cognizant of the time, but all the different gems you're sharing, and just to bring it together, with the experiences you've had, you mentioned earlier, so we've spoken about the experience of the student, the experience of the teachers, you in your position and your ability to work with people where they are, recognizing that not only do our students have different points on their journey and different levels of understanding and potential, so do all the individuals within our learning community. So we have to meet them there. So, is there an experience you could share? Because earlier on, you mentioned this concept of discomfort. For me personally, that's always a concept within equity work, DEIJ work that I find relatively challenging. So I always try to pose the question, do you have an experience where you've supported someone in these changes or an organization or a year group or whatever, but where you have been able to take that point of discomfort to a point where they do feel comfortable, seeing that as one of the aims of belonging and
Mm.
inclusion? Um, is there an experience you could share with us of that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a long time ago, long, long time ago. I entered into a school that was using accommodation and modifications within a learning support platform, program interchangeably. We know that accommodations are very different than modifications. And so I walked in and I just moved newly to this school from Canada. And I was just like, well, um, what do you mean by modification? What do you mean by, I was a little bit confused because I'm a specialist in learning support and special ed. And so I dug a little bit deeper,
Mhm.
and so I worked with the school and I found out that the staff didn't know the difference and that sometimes our understanding of the language is different. People may not understand what is an accommodation, what is a modification, are two very different things. And
And
I
for our
feel it's the
listeners,
same.
would you be able to just share what it was in that school, what the
Yeah,
school
in the
was doing?
context, yeah, absolutely. In the context that I was in, modifications were more like a change in grade level. The child is able to achieve at a certain grade level, then then you modify the curriculum. Whereas an accommodation is something that accommodates the learning, so it's equitable for the student depending on their learning needs. And so it was used interchangeably. And at that time, this was like maybe 15, 20 years ago, is that, it was very common to do that. And now that term, those two terms they are very conscientious of when those two words are used because there was that clarity that was brought. Same with
Mm,
DEIJ, I'm finding now, is that people have a different understanding of what is diversity, what is
mm,
equity, what is inclusion, what does justice mean, what does belonging mean, and a lot of times they're seen in silos, and I've seen it's a big problem because you need each of those different layers to truly have belonging within
mm,
one's organization. So I love semantics. I love understanding the language behind things. It's like it makes me really think about what it is that, how people's understandings have come to be. And so I find it interesting where do these understandings come from? Why are people saying diversity only as one thing, but not the other? And particularly with like a lot of international schools, diversity is seen as the flags, the food, the festival, the fashion. But there's a lot more. There's those intersectional identities within being diverse. And so I think in my context, that was the one example I shared with you is that, the developing a shared understanding of the language. And then from there, it just spearheaded so many other initiatives once there was that sound understanding of what is an accommodation. Okay, now let's get into those IEPs. Okay, now let's get into another program element that we can add into the organization. But it's the language. If we don't understand that, then there's a lot of confusion.
I really love that because, yes, I think what I'm taking away from what you're sharing here is that focus on semantics, which not everyone always has the time or capacity to do, but where we can support people in understanding the language being used, it gets rid of a lot of confusion. It allows people to really come together, and it can remove some of the discomfort, which is often born from confusion or uncertainty or fear because you're not sure. So,
Mm.
I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Now, at this point, what I'm going to ask you for, just quickly as we reach the end, what might be a key takeaway for someone who maybe has just caught the last 30 seconds of this? What might be something that the people listening can take away It could be a resource, a book, a reflective question, or just something that you would like to leave people with as we reach the end of today.
Okay. A single polished narrative can flatten the complexity and silence tension, which are an essential parts of growth and equity work.
I have to ask you,
Yes?
is that a quote?
No, it's not.
If it's not,
It's not. It
it is
really isn't.
becoming one. That was
No,
beautiful. Um,
no, it's not a
Thank you
quote.
so much for sharing that. I'm not going to try and talk over that. For our listeners, I'm going to place some links in the description where you can connect with Yasmin and explore her ideas and work. Thank you so much for watching or listening. I will see you on our next episode of DEIJ Hot Takes. And Yasmin, that was enlightening. And I'm going to mull over those last sentences you said for a long time after this episode. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.